Hello, welcome to Converging Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. Before we get to this episode, I just wanted to take a minute for a small update. When I started this podcast about 6 months ago now, I really didn't have a whole lot of expectations for it. I wanted to have a podcast with interesting conversations with people from different perspectives. And I said before, I've been pretty reticent to doing a podcast, mostly because I had no idea, and I'm still learning as I go, but mostly because I didn't think I had anything too novel to say. There's 1,000,001 podcasts out there, and I didn't really think that it was, anything I could really offer out there. And I can gladly say that I'm pretty wrong on that. I have had an absolute blast with all of my guests. I have learned something or many things new from each guest. I've been super honored and privileged and blessed that all of my guests have given their time and their energy freely to come and talk about their work, their research, certain books they're putting out, and really just coming and sharing that on this podcast. So I'm overwhelmed with gratitude to every single one of my guests. They have all been sincerely a delight and just absolutely wonderful. So I can't say enough thanks to every single one of them that has been on this podcast and all of the future ones. I have some great guests coming up over the next couple months, and I'm super excited to talk to every single one of them. And then listeners, my goodness, even for if it's 6 or 5 or 10 or 50 or 100, I have listeners all over the world, which is so crazy to me. I have to pinch myself when I'm, when I see some of the analytics that come back, and listeners all over Australia, Canada, most of Western Europe, there's a few African countries, some South American countries, Asian countries, just really everywhere but Antarctica. So I don't really know what to say to that. I just am so thankful that people listen to these conversations. I hope they get something out of it. I hope they learn some things and hopefully can engage with topics with people in their communities and their networks. So super thankful for all of the listeners that listen to this podcast, and hopefully keep listening and learning a few things from all the awesome guests that I have on. So going to keep plugging away. Right now I'm doing twice a week, really just because I enjoy it so much, and I have enough guests that I'm able to do that with. So I'm embarrassment of riches over here. So it's likely I'll go back to once a week and maybe do a little bit more promotion and stuff like that. So thinking about a few things, how I can do it, see what the right rhythm is, and as I keep going. So I'm going to keep figuring it out and keep, learning as I go. And I just really appreciative of everybody that's both guests and listeners thus far in the first 6 months. Okay, so now for today's guest. On this episode, I'm talking with Monica Guzman. Monica is a Seattle-based journalist, and she's a writer, and she's an author of an upcoming book. She's mostly known for being the co-founder of an award-winning Seattle newsletter called the Evergrey. She's also currently the senior media advisor at Braver Angels, which is, I've had John Wood Jr. on here before, and he's also a big part of Braver Angels. So they're a good bunch over there, really good people trying to find ways to connect through dialogue and to make different types of real bipartisan change in a variety of issues. So really good organization. I can't recommend that enough. And she is trying to finish and get her book published. I think it's due in next year in 2022 with the tentative title, I Never Thought of It That Way. She talks about some of that in the conversation that we have. So in this conversation, we talk about how she became involved in journalism and specific brand of journalism in which she enjoys doing. We talk a little bit about the current state of journalism, both nationally and locally. We talk about, how cities can create culture and then how people are kind of the centerpiece of that. We talked about why she started the Evergrey and the major focus of that organization. We discuss her work now with Braver Angels and some of the dynamics of race and multiculturalism. We then talk about her upcoming book and some of the main concepts, such as curiosity. And then the last part of the conversation, we talk about Latinos in the United States and more broadly, and kind of what the Latino vote is and what that coalition of voters looks like, and some of the ins and outs of Latinos in general, along with many other topics. I have to say, I've just kind of started to get to know Monica. She is an absolutely wonderful human being. She has such a wonderful spirit. She's, really smart, really sharp on a lot of things, and I think really genuine. I think sincerely genuine. She has a curiosity for people and for relationships and wanting to understand things, and has this kind of infectious way, right, of trying to, show that, maybe this is a helpful way of trying to connect with people, and but still very honest. So she was an absolute delight to talk to for over 2 hours, and she was most certainly welcome anytime to come on and talk. And so I really enjoyed my conversation with her, and I hope you do as well. So now I bring you Monica Guzman. I am here with Monica Guzman. Monica, what's going on? It's nice to see you.
Hey, happy Friday. It is Friday, right? Yeah.
I think so. Yes, it is Friday. It's the end of March, which is wild. Where did the year go?
Yeah. I can't believe it's spring again. Just the whole time warp of the pandemic just blows my mind.
Yeah, it really is hard to know that it's April next week.
Wow.
Yeah, it's weird.
Oh my gosh.
Well, thanks for coming on. You are a new person I've connected with through the one and only Angel Eduardo.
Shout out.
He's a good buddy, so I'm glad we got to connect. So we have some cool things to talk about. So tell listeners who you are and what you do and what you're working on.
Cool. So my name is Monica Guzman. I'm coming in live from Seattle, where I have been the last, dozen years or so. Love this place. I've been a journalist pretty much all my career, a couple stints in startups, but always tied back in some way to the public square and what's in the public interest. I've always been passionate about all of that. Currently, I am a host for a monthly interview show on Crosscut, which is a nonprofit Seattle-based news site that is rad and awesome. I'm also working on a book, my first book called I Never Thought of It That Way, A Guide to Building Bridges in Dangerously Divided Times. I'm working on revising the first draft, which is in a lot of ways more fun than writing it. Ooh, boy, writing a book during the pandemic, I would not recommend it. But man, am I having a lot of fun with those ideas. I'm also an advisor to Braver Angels, the national depolarization organization, and learning from them every day. So much going on there. So that's just a little sample, but I know we're going to have a lot to talk about.
Forgive me, Evergrey, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Is that still together or no?
It is indeed. So the Evergrey is a publication. It's a Seattle newsletter and community that aims to connect locals to their city. And I co-founded it in October of 2016. It's been really rad. I haven't been involved for the last year and a half. Again, the time warp of the pandemic. It might be 2 years now. I can't tell. I think about a year and a half. So it's being run by a woman named Grace. It's doing great work. And yeah, that was my entrepreneurial thing. I had to get it out of my system, and it was awesome. And it's still in my system for the record.
So before Seattle, where were you hailing from?
So going all the way back, I was born in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico. So born in Mexico. Nice, and cool. Then when I was 5 and change, moved to Texas with my family through work that my dad had, and then went to New England somewhere in the tail end of my kindergarten year. So grew up mostly in small town New Hampshire, Seacoast, New Hampshire.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
There you go. And then went to college up in Brunswick, Maine at a little liberal arts school named Bowdoin. Polar bear was our mascot. And then when I graduated in 2005, hopped around on a really awesome journalism fellowship I was lucky to get. Was a cops reporter at the Houston Chronicle. Was an education reporter at the Midland Daily News, which if you could see my hand, I would be pointing to the middle of it. That's how Michiganders talk about where things are in Michigan. And then ended up in Seattle on New Year's Eve of 2006 and have been here ever since.
Wow. So you really have been all over the place. Like you've seen the country, right? Yeah. Texas, well, maybe not as much, but definitely New England, so New Hampshire, Maine is pretty cool. And then Michigan and Seattle, you've been all over the place. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's been fun. Lots of different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. I've said this before, but most people agree that the United States kind of functions like 6 different countries at least.
It does.
It's just different culture and language and music and history and all that stuff. So it's every time people ask me
about it.
Where should I go in the US? I'm like, I don't know. Each place is a little different. So
yep, very true.
I won't ask you which place is your favorite, but okay. So how did you get into journalism? And that'll be a good jumping off point for us. You just like to write, or you like to find stories, or what got you into journalism?
Well, like many things, there's several on-ramps. One takes me back to maybe 2nd or 3rd grade. I used to be just one of those overachieving students, even way back then. And I would finish my tests on, loose leaf paper in my little Catholic school jumper, writing out whatever I had to write. And then I would have to go up to the front and hand in my paper. And there was a little stack of other paper, just blank paper in case you needed more. So I would grab another sheet, sit back down at my desk, and document everything that the students were doing. They weren't doing much. They were just taking a test. But I would say, Craig Maggio just got up to get a tissue. The teacher just stood up to go to the door and then sat back down, and it would be this little diary. So that goes back a ways. When I was in high school, my dad's a computer programmer. He built me a movie review website because I was so into movies, always have been. My family took me and my parents took me and my brother to the movies at least once a week, sometimes more. And I remember it wasn't until like 6th grade that I realized, not everyone does this? Wait, you mean you guys don't see a movie really? Anyway, but I wanted to review movies. I thought that would be fun, and I like to write. So that led to, at my college newspaper, I became the movie reviewer, the movie columnist. And then they were like, oh, you seem to write pretty well. Do you want to edit one of the college newspaper sections? I said, sure. And then I was senior editor my senior year. And by then I knew I had done an internship, a couple of internships in local media in New Hampshire. And I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. But it really kind of wasn't mostly wanting to document the world. It was also, I get into this kind of, it's going to sound wacky, but a trance state when I interview people. I really, really like to disappear into other people's stories. It's almost an addictive feeling to me. When I get to that point where I'll become conscious of it and I'll kind of float away from my own body and I'll realize that I am just a transparent vessel and I'm just so curious. I'm pure curiosity. And I just want to know more about this person. And I'll look at the person and they are lost too. They're lost in their own world where they're discovering how interesting they truly are. I love that. A lot of people don't recognize how interesting they actually are. But everyone is interesting. That's one of my personal beliefs. It's a conviction. Everyone is interesting. Just got to ask enough questions to get in deep. And then they begin to mine their own experience for all kinds of illuminating stuff they didn't even realize was there. It's a really cool kind of discussion. So being hooked on that feeling from my very first journalism internship at New Hampshire Public Radio, doing a feature story on independent cinema and sitting outside this little independent cinema in New Hampshire that was like a former church where they had just played My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And sitting with the owner, remember that?
Is that still the highest grossing independent film or whatever? I know it was for like
it was
years.
for years. I mean, that's when people started talking about indie cinema, independent movie theaters and movies. But anyway, that was the first kind of bite of the drug for me, and then just kind of went from there.
So for you, I guess in terms of journalism, how do you see it? Let's start with a broad lens and kind of go into a narrow one. But in terms of how you personally see it as the function of it, kind of on a mass level and then more on an individual level, do you segregate it from, kind of quote unquote national journalism for more small town local journalism? How do you think about the field of journalism just in general? And then we can kind of burrow a little bit deeper.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to think about it, for sure. The way that national and local media operate is extraordinarily different. How it all operates in the age of social media is extraordinarily different. I was there for a lot of that transformation and disruption. A lot of it obviously disrupted the industry in some really unfortunate ways, and in some fortunate ways where it brought people closer. It brought journalists closer to people. It was necessary. It had to happen. But the economics of it also meant that it became very useful for each journalism organization to be able to very narrowly define their audiences. And because social media traffics in emotion, that also means that to build a loyal audience, you usually want to reflect and respond to how they feel about things around them. And that's how you end up with this pluralistic situation where everyone, no matter what they think, can usually find their own preferred set of voices. So, take that, like there's pros and cons to that. And then, of course, with our devices, making everything reachable from any moment, and social media always having these sort of dopamine lollipops for us to just keep snacking on, that separation from not just local, but really just where you are and who's around you is where your investment can make the most difference. And so you've probably heard, because it's true, right? The laws in your local community are going to affect you a lot more than what's going on nationally. Also, your voice is going to be really strong locally, and your investment in your neighborhood or in whatever's going on civically or not, like in any way in your local community, just has such a bearing on your life and the people around you. But the pull of national media is so strong, so well resourced, and so hard to compete with. Now, the geographic barriers don't really mean anything in the economics of the internet. So much has changed there. And that's been an area I've been really focused on for a while. To me, it's in local that people can build relationships. It's in local where journalists can actually shake the hands of their readers, get to know stakeholders in person, and build just much more relevance. But again, it's so much harder to scale. It's so much harder to get the revenue you need. So it's really, really tricky. And right now in the industry, there's a lot of energy being spent on how do you help local media not necessarily be what it was, because again, there were a lot of troubles with an older era of sort of journalist knows better and are so much more educated than you about what you should care about. I think we're getting out of that era, and that's really good. And that's where social media has been a gift. But yeah, and it's an industry that it's in so much turmoil for all the same reasons that the rest of the world is in so much turmoil. Our norms have been disrupted. We're not sure how we relate to each other, and it's really hard to agree on the truth.
Yeah. I want to come back to that point about the kind of how it was, and then the advent of social media and how that's people I think in general will absolutely ostracize journalism in general, right? It's like, well, the New York Times is so blah blah blah, it's so terrible, it's so biased, or the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, it's super, take the big pieces, but then just in general, right? People will say many things about media at large or journalism at large, and people will, that's the favorite punching bag for people. Well, this is media's problem, that's the favorite punching bag. Yep. And certainly, right? I mean, there are certain pieces of that, but I think it's, again, it's a favorite punching bag, and I don't think it's always applied. And so I think it's important to sort of parse out what is and what isn't, and to really say like, no, like this is a good piece. And just because it's in this publication doesn't mean that it's inherently going to be left or right. Sometimes it is, but before we do that though, so was any of your notions or your ideas about doing Evergrey, and what was the other organization that you said that you started? Or
only Evergrey. I've only co-founded myself Evergrey. I've worked for a bit of columnist at Seattle Times, Seattle PI, a couple of national pubs.
So what was the motivation for that? To start that?
To start Evergrey?
Yeah.
Yeah, me and my co-founder were sitting at a coffee shop and just venting to each other. She and I both had backgrounds in more community engagement and community moderation through journalism. Mm-hmm. And so we were so frustrated with the status quo in a lot of local newsrooms at the time about, again, kind of a we know better than you, a sort of aloofness from the community that isn't productive. We really, really just saw that as a problem. That to me, it's almost like castles in the sky. They're not attached to anything going on in the ground. Media can sometimes be like that. Even the language, even the unit of the article, there might be an article that says, the headline is I-594, a problem for Republicans or whatever. And so you have to know what I-594 is, right? And then the first paragraph just gives you kind of the update on the horse race or something, but again, doesn't explain anything to you. Mm-hmm. The second paragraph doesn't really either. And by the fourth paragraph, you're thinking, this isn't for me. I'm behind. I'm not who this news article is for. I'm not special enough. I'm not good enough to be informed about my community. And that's how I think a lot of news ends up feeling to people. And I think that particularly in the internet era, there's been this sense of, oh yeah, you're supposed to read the news all the time. You're supposed to watch the news all the time. And you're supposed to care about everything at exactly the same time. And of course, the economics of it means that's what we want. Journalists want your attention. They all want your attention all the time. And they'll even make you feel guilty. Well, you should know what's going on at City Hall, So partly making the Evergrey was, we know there's a way to reimagine what local news really is. And if you start where people really are, they don't start with a sense of, I need to know the news. That's what I need to know the news. Mm-hmm. No, it's, I need to build a meaningful local life. Right. And the values that the Evergrey started with were about that if you begin to connect to the people around you, you will connect to the place around you. Mm-hmm. You will have a more meaningful life because you'll feel a sense of belonging and community. Mm-hmm. And you'll start to find your tribe and your place and your groups. So Seattle at the time was the fastest growing city in America. So we had a lot of newcomers coming in and a lot of tension between newcomers and old timers, wondering how the city was changing. Housing market through the roof, homelessness, a huge issue, et cetera.
Sorry, is that kind of like how people are migrating from California to Austin now? Kind of the same?
Oh, it's so different now with the pandemic.
Right. But there will be people, there'll be like an exodus of sorts, right? There'll be either a city where people just start to kind of, a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? People not from that city will come and start moving in and start living there. And then, like you're saying, right, it, makes the housing market go up and everything becomes more expensive. So that's what was happening with Seattle, some kind of.
Absolutely. And so it got to the point where even longtime locals weren't sure what their city was anymore. So they had a hard time connecting. And then all the newcomers, of course, like bright and bushy-tailed, a lot of them wanted to know what was going on, wanted to connect with where they were, and were facing a lot of obstacles to that. So we said, we need a media, we need to create an organization and a community that is more about that begins with the fact that people want connection, and news, the stories about what's going on around you, serves that end, not the other way around. This isn't about the news at all. So it was very different, and man, we had a lot of fun. It was really successful and fun.
Yeah. So just specifically, so Washington, So Washington, Oregon, I think Alaska, Hawaii. I think that's it now.
For what?
Those are the only 4 states I have not been to. So yeah, I have not been to those. Those are like the only 4. I'm almost.
How did you wait? I want to know how you got to Montana and Idaho, but not Oregon and Washington.
Yeah, I have family that lives in Montana.
Oh, there you go.
So that was the link there. So then, is trip down to Yellowstone and the Tetons, and then we looped back through Idaho and stayed a couple of days there, and then back. So,
Okay.
So
Fair.
I never got to all the way to the other side of the coast. So I haven't been to Seattle. I've always wanted to go. I wanted to go to Portland.
You're forgiven for now, I suppose. I guess that story holds up.
It's on the list, right? It's on the list. But I mean, it's a big city, yeah. I mean, it's a big city. Okay. Was the paper for all of Seattle, or was it just like certain communities within Seattle, or how broadly did it go out?
It was for all of Seattle, and there was no print, so it wasn't a paper, but it was the newsletter and lots of events, really fun events, everything from speed friending. We had literal speed friending events.
Is this like speed dating just for friends?
Yeah, for friends, making friends. Those were really popular and sold out quick.
That's cool.
We had like cocktail making classes with local mixologists. All kinds of like tours of interesting things in the neighborhood, right? So we'd find someone who, some museum in Ballard or some fun activity in Capitol Hill, and just invite our readers to come and do it with us. And then we had an event series called Setting the Table, where we would talk about really tough local issues, but have dinner as well. So this local chef, a freelance chef, Justin Khanna, would like make an incredible meal, and we'd all get together, and it'd be like 50 people, but all spread out different tables. And first we'd watch a short panel, and then everyone at the tables would actually get to know each other and their positions in the issue and what brought them together. So again, it's focused on the connection, not the information.
No, that's really cool. I guess the one question I have about that is that this might be a harder question to answer, but did you feel like you were creating culture, or, because each city has its own culture, I would say, there's a history that, or did you feel that you were just basically taking the history and culture of Seattle and modernizing it and using it with all the newcomers and people that had been there and making connections that way? How did you kind of view it in that way?
It's a bit of a blend of both. No, it's a great question. One thing it reminds me of, this is minor, but I remember one day I was sitting there going, hang on a second. Like, does anyone know what Seattle's birthday is? And I looked it up, and it was a day in May, I believe, like the founding of Seattle. And I just thought about it like, nobody celebrates Seattle's birthday. Like, nobody thinks about that. Part of the point of the Evergrey was to bring people together across difference, no matter what people believe. In fact, Evergrey is a name inspired by Seattle's very gray sky, but also this idea that gray, being a blend of black and white, the most contrasting tones, is possible, that nuance is possible. We're covered by this blanket of nuance, was the poetic way to put it. Nice. So yeah, and there's a bunch of community kind of studies that show, well, if you can get folks to think about what they have in common, they can see each other in a different way and begin to kind of bridge where they need to. So we're all here in Seattle, right? Whether you're homeless, whether you're on the left or the right, whether you're a business person, you work at Amazon, you're whatever, like an artist, we're all in Seattle. So the Evergrey was elevating the culture of Seattle. We weren't sugarcoating it, because part of love is wanting something to be better. So we also looked at all of the really big struggles in Seattle and tried to give it a nuanced view, and then always included pieces in our stories about what people could do. It's like, here's who you can call, here's what you can do to learn more about this and this and this, and there's an event next week and blah, 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 blah. All actionable, very, very focused on action.
Were you trying to set a sort of model, or was this just, look, this is for Seattle. If, people in Redmond, right? Isn't that where Microsoft was or is?
Yeah,
or, right? Or Tacoma or even outside of that, right? Our neighbors in Portland or in Oregon, and people in neighboring states or all around the way. Was it just one of those things where it's like, well, this is what we do, you can do it if you want, you don't have to? Or were you trying to sort of set a model of like, hey, here's a way in which we're trying to connect people in the city? And I would say there's some element of creating a more modernized culture that way.
Yeah.
Would that be cool for other places to do it, or do you link up with other, like, kind of like sister city things, or did it expand or no?
It did. So there's a network of 5 newsletters.
Oh, cool.
We were the second node. The first one was the New Traffic newsletter in Miami. Wasn't exactly like us at all. Like, we innovated on the model quite a bit, but we were the way that Evergrey was able to be published was through a partnership with the company that started this other Miami newsletter and wanted to expand. So they helped with the technology, the business model, the whole thing. And then there were newsletters inspired by all of it in Portland, Pittsburgh, and Orlando.
Oh, cool.
But the way I thought of it was, we're not scaling the whole thing itself, the series of mechanisms and process. I want to scale the process, not the product. Meaning, the thing that should be scaled is, where are you, right? Where is your city, your town, what have you? What do people there mean when they want to be connected? What are the things in that place where connection becomes possible? What are the activities? What are the things that are valued? And, can you talk to people to understand what the glue should be, and then provide the glue? Can you begin there instead of, again, beginning with the news? And we thought about it. A good example I have is we did over 60 one-hour interviews with we tried to make as representative a selection of folks from the city, and we asked them questions like, let's say it's a year from now and you love Seattle so much you never want to leave. What had to have happened for that to be the case? It's 1 year from now and you cannot stay in Seattle. You got to gotta get out of there. Yeah. Like, what had to have happened, right? So you capture people's concerns, hopes, fears, aspirations, and you understand, again, like how they would build a meaningful life. And so one person that we talked to was really into tango and was part of this tango club that I'd never heard of, right? And he was talking about how much it meant to him. And because Seattle was the fastest growing city, this was very much on people's minds. And what that meant for him was the tango club and that community he had built that always used to be able to go like every Wednesday to the so-and-so, in this neighborhood, and every Thursday to this other place. They ended up having to split up because traffic got so bad that you couldn't connect across the city anymore. So that's the difference to me between, I'm going to do a transportation beat and I'm going to think about where people really are and what this is really about. And transportation is about access, right? Transportation is about, can you go to the places you want to go that mean something to you? So we try to reorient every kind of traditional news beat into, what does it mean for people? What are their concerns and anxieties? What is it they're actually looking for from this?
So the Evergrey and then all the pieces that you're doing, it's very person-centered. And so I guess the obvious question that maybe isn't so obvious is, why? I mean, who gives a shit? Why do we want to
person-centered?
Why person-centered, and why do we want to connect people within a city?
It's a great question.
It's a very, I think kind of the obvious question, but I think maybe a little bit harder too. Like, why is, I mean, who cares, right? Why is this important?
Yeah. I think people only give a shit if it's about other people. Like when I look at the world, cities, money, systems, institutions, all constructs. The only thing that's real is people. That's it. At the end of the day, it's just people. If we all woke up and had different memories and a sense of knowledge of what was around, if everyone in Seattle decided to call it Mimiqua, I don't know, like it's all in our heads, what matters is people. And we see this in the level of individual lives too, is like, in fact, in our research for the Evergrey, and this is an ongoing story in Seattle, an ongoing little thorn on people's sides, people talk about something called the Seattle freeze. And the Seattle freeze is this idea that in Seattle, people freeze each other out, that social stuff doesn't happen very quickly, especially if you're a newcomer. People won't let you in. It's just kind of terrible. It's the Seattle freeze. But what you learn sort of talking to people is when people say they don't like the city, what they really mean is that they haven't connected with people. They haven't found the people to connect to. And so we would talk to people and then talk to them again and talk to them again. And they would say, oh yeah, I really like the city. And then you sort of pry a little bit and you realized, oh yeah, I just found this like dragon boating club on South Lake Union. What? Yeah, I'm part of a dragon boating club. Right. Okay, cool. Right. Like, or, oh yeah, now I'm a regular at this coffee shop and somebody there like sees me. It's not about the city. It's never been about the city. It's about whether you're connected to other people. So that's just, to me, that's just like essential life, right? So people don't care unless unless they are being spoken to and being heard.
I hear that. There's something about it. I mean, I hear that and I agree with it, but there's something about it that's I'm not fully agreeing with, and I don't know.
Yeah. Tell me, like, think out loud.
I don't know how to verbalize it. So I'll use an example from like, I guess in my neck of the woods. So I've said a bunch of times, I'm one of those really obnoxious Marylanders, right? I have the Maryland flag everywhere, right? The Maryland flag is literally, I have it all over my house. I have it everywhere, right? Crabs, Natty Bow, right? Flying dog, the whole thing, right? Very Maryland centric. And I think absolutely, yes. You could call a city anything you want. You could have a mixture of different people or the same group of people. But I wonder if in creation, right? So if you start, a new city develops and then, you look at it 500 years later, there are things outside of people that make that city what it is. Now, it's a little abstract, right? So like, I think people fill it or people inhabit it, and then their imprint stays there even when they die or another generation dies. But there's something that the thing that makes it, I would say definitely the glue and the engine of cities or states or territories or, this sort of healthy nationalism of sorts or this healthy statism or whichever way you look at it is people for sure. But I don't know if it's only that. So like,
yeah, I think you're right. And you know what the visual coming to my head is that these things in cities, I think about, for example, like the quintessential city tragedy is when a beloved business closes, right? It's not like that business didn't have meaning. No. Of course it had meaning. So structures and institutions and all these things become infused with the energy of people, the legacy, the histories, the roots. Yeah. And those things are the things that people find meaning in. I grew up going to that bowling alley. Right. So my family like goes back generations doing so-and-so. Right. So yeah, it's not like the energy of people gets contained in people at all. There are stories that get written and those stories do matter. But here's where I think the reason for being person-centric is ultimately most important. One of my sort of internal taglines for the Evergrey is be powerful in your city. If you forget that it's really all people at the end of the day, you forget that you can make a difference. That regardless of how strong an institution or whatever the narrative is around you, if you can get everybody else to just plug back into the vein of, look, we're all just people here, let's make a good society together, you can do wonders. So it's also about that. It's like, whether you've been here 2 weeks or 2 years, you are entitled to go and be part of your city. Like, walk in, learn about it, be active in it. You do matter, doesn't matter how long, like, all that stuff. Other people will tell you don't belong here because you haven't been here this long, or you don't belong here because you don't make enough money or whatever. It's just not true. So that's part of it, is like, there's this human level that as long as we keep coming back to it, we can feel our power.
Yes, I agree. And
oh, I love the yes hands.
And I think that there's something about like heritage and like culture and tradition and history as well. So I don't think that that's contrary to what you're saying. Nope. But I think that is in addition to it as well. That's not the be all end all. Definitely. And it is definitely people, it's like, this is a weird analogy. It's like a muscle, right? Like, yeah, it's going to be there, but unless you exercise or you work with it, it's not going to grow. It's not going to create new things to it. It's not going to add anything to it. It's just going to kind of be stagnant. Yep. So I think there's definitely history and culture with cities and towns. And that's important. That's really important to respect, because I think sometimes, so I'm starting to kind of like, flirt into some of the other things, but I think sometimes when there's a wave of newcomers, let's just keep it at the local area for a minute, to a city. Seattle's a big city. So, but even if it's a small town, right? You don't want it where there's too much change too fast with a disregard for the history and culture that have been created by other people that have been there. And I don't think that that's an arm out against new people coming in, but it's more of a, well, how do you have a respect or a consideration for the people that have been here before you that have created that? You can be a part of this and create the new chapter, but not at a disdain or disregard for all the other people that created all the other chapters, you know, proverbially.
Yep.
Does that, what do you think?
Oh yeah, no, we had one of our more popular video series was, it was different videos that all played on a theme of what it means to be a local. And so one of them, it was like 16 people, all kind of talking heads going back and forth. And it was all like just regular folks in the city. But one of the questions was, what does it mean to be a Seattle local? Another one was, how do newcomers come in respectfully? And it was all natives and longtimers giving advice to newcomers, you know, and all that. How do you know, when do you feel like a local? What does it take? So like, you have to have both people and culture, right? People who are just individuals with no glue, nothing tying them together. It's kind of meaningless, right? But then a culture that is so strong that it forgets that people are ultimately what we're here for. And like the most important force in the world can get really stagnant or oppressive. So that gets into some sociology and political theory, but like, I think you do have to keep both in check.
Yeah. I'll give one example on this. So I always want people to come visit my state. Come visit Maryland. It's super awesome. We're awesome, right? Come visit Maryland. You want to move here? Great. I'm always very inviting and welcome and encouraging. But there's some things though where it's like, listen, you don't have to like crabs. That's fine. You could be allergic to crabs. That's fine. But that is something that's part of our culture as Marylanders. So for example, I thought about this, like I overthought this like one summer. I go to the Eastern Shore, right? I don't live on the Eastern Shore. I live in the Western Shore. So I go on the Eastern Shore, where all the true Marylanders live, right? I go there and that's where I go and I usually eat crabs, right? I don't go to Baltimore. Baltimore's fine. I love Baltimore, but I like getting crabs and eating crabs on the Eastern Shore, right? There's more of the bay and life, and there's more of there is a subculture within that as well, right? There's more types of economy that's revolves around the bay and that side of Maryland. And it's funny, I went with a group of people and I was sitting there and I was watching everybody. So the way it works is, you know, if anybody's had crabs, it all works the same way of sorts. You get on a table and they roll out the paper, and sometimes they give you bibs, some not. And you get the mallets and you get the small knives and you get the butter and the whole thing, right? And I've recognized that you have groups of people sitting together, sharing and enjoying the best crabs in the United States. and no one's talking. It's quiet, right? A little bit of some rumbling, but it's quiet because you're busy, right? You're doing you're doing the whole thing. You're cracking the shells. You're taking all the meat out. It's a lot of work, right? But it's all worth it because it's the best. And when people will, you're taking stuff out of your teeth and you're putting it in the bucket and you're doing a bunch of things and you're not saying a lot, right? You do say some things in between chewing and throwing this here and whatever, and I thought about it. I was like, there's a certain type of a way of being present with everyone else without having to actually talk, right? I mean, you do talk. I'm not saying people sit in silence, but and there's this really like, how do I say it? There's this participatory and there's this activeness to it, but it's something that is also really communal. It's a really communal thing.
Experience.
Yeah, it is a type of experience. And, obviously the bay is super nice if you're there, and, some people bring boats and they have all that too. And to me, in my mind, I say, oh, yes, that's what it is. It's very communal. That is a symbol and a representation of what it means to be somewhat of a Marylander, right? It's this communal aspect. That's not to say that other people aren't communal. And in my mind, it's not necessarily about the crabs, although they're fucking amazing. But it's more about kind of adopting that idea for us as Marylanders, that communal, experiential kind of way. And so if somebody were to move to Maryland and they were going to live there permanently or semi-permanently, I would say like, hey, this is what we do. Let me take you over and let me show you how to do it. This is what we do over here. And I would want, they don't have to like it, but to just say that there's an experience that they're doing that, like that's one example. Yep. And I'm sure every city has their own thing, which is so cool. But there's a culture we've built around that.
Yeah, we started this conversation, I think, before you started recording with kind of a note of about there's all these different cultures around the country, and it's beautiful. Like that's good. When I lived in Michigan briefly to work in the middle of the hand, right? I drove in my tiny ass. Was it a Hyundai Accent? Mm-hmm. Not cool. Nope. No, you don't come driving Korean, Japanese cars. You get a Ford or a Chevy.
All my Michigan listeners are going to know exactly what you're meaning right now.
Yeah, no. Like I remember at first I was like laughing. I was like, you guys aren't serious. Oh, they were serious.
Oh, it's serious.
They were serious. There's a car industry, there's an auto industry. There are roots, there are families. And we don't mess around. There's a lot of Chevys and Fords in Michigan. Yes. But like last thing I would have thought about going in there, right? So there's this beautiful tension between individual expression and communal norms.
Yeah.
And again, they have to check each other.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. Well, I'll say, if you ever come to Maryland, I will go and we will go.
I'm so excited.
And I will take you crabbing and we will go and get crabs and we'll do the whole thing and it'll be a blast.
Oh my God.
Okay, so tell me how you got into Braver Angels and what you do there now and, kind of your involvement with that very fine organization.
So a couple of threads. One is, and it's actually started at the Evergrey, if not before, but after the 2016 election, so many people talk about that as being a turning point.
Watershed moment.
Yeah, obviously a huge deal. Mm-hmm. We had just started the Evergrey in Seattle at that point, and the city, being extraordinarily democratic, was just dead. Just, November 9th, you couldn't even, there was no breath anywhere. Yeah. And then everybody had their own journey through that time. Yep. And part of my journey over the next several months included a scene that would repeat itself. And the scene went like this. I would be at some networking event. I would be at some dinner with newish friends who didn't know me that well, or even some friends who did know me pretty well. And the conversation would turn to Trump, to what was going on, to all of the fears and anxieties you would expect in a very blue city. And I'm blue myself, so it's not like I didn't share a lot of those fears and anxieties. I did. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, as that conversation would snowball, because when like-minded people share a space, their opinions, they grow more comfortable sharing their opinions more candidly, and they even more push them even further along where they're going, right? Yeah. So inevitably, someone would start talking about how people who voted for Trump are bad people. And that's even a nice way of putting it. And that's where my heart would start beating, because I would be thinking about my parents. Mm-hmm. And so my parents live in the Seattle area as well. They've been here since my son was born. They're Mexican immigrants, right? Like I was born in Mexico. They lived in Mexico a big chunk of their lives. Mm-hmm. And they totally voted for Trump. And I totally understand why. And like we've talked about it a lot, and I get it. Mm-hmm. And all of these things that people said about people who voted for Trump are just, I mean, they're interesting. I understand where they're coming from. That's just not right. Mm-hmm. It's just not, like, I know that's not right. Mm-hmm. And so I would find a way to say, because I'm one of those people who I can't stand when things are left unsaid. Mm-hmm. Or when there's something you want to get out and you can't, like I have to find a way to do it. So I always would find a way to say, well, my parents are Mexican immigrants who voted for Trump, or something like that. And it's such a conversation stopper. And I can't tell you how many times it would just, because this does not compute. Back then the stereotypes about Latinos and Mexicans was even stronger than it is today about their political leanings, and especially in Seattle. And so it was like, if I had been like just white and from a rural area and said, like, my parents voted for Trump, it would have been a surprise. People would have kept their stereotypes about them, whatever. But something about my parents being Mexican was like, hang on. And then people would, most of the time, this was the best part, they would get curious and they would go, why? Wait, why? Can you tell us about that? And so I would become the sort of de facto representative of an entire, like, of something that half the country believes, but that there aren't enough representatives in Seattle to talk about it.
Yeah.
So that happened a lot in those months after. Meanwhile, I see the city, again, like so much fear and anxiety, and it's very justified on a lot of levels. Just everything kind of pushing in one side. And I realize that I am that much more invested in the project of keeping nuance alive when nobody wants it anymore, when they're convinced it's life and death, when they're convinced everyone on the other side is out to get them and totally evil. And this is war. And so at some point, that was the beginning of a thread that kind of led me to believe, like, I just don't know that journalism works in this climate very well. You look at, it's not like we have a shared sense of reality anymore. The pluralistic media outlets are just so split up. And partisanship is so neatly stacked by demographics into these columns, and people are so personally invested for understandable reasons. Why wouldn't you be? And so that's just a mess. So the thing that we did at the Evergrey, me and my co-founder just did, frankly, something like wild and crazy at the time. And I still can't believe that we convinced the parent company to let us do it and spend all this time planning it. But we took 20 people from King County, which is where Seattle is, on a 10-hour road trip to Sherman County, Oregon, which, according to this interactive map that we had found on the Washington Post, was the nearest county to ours that voted exactly mirror opposite in the presidential election.
Okay.
So, yeah, and planning that took, I found some folks in Sherman County, which, by the way, is a county of about 2,000 people. It's one of the smallest, if not the smallest, in Oregon. It's largely agricultural, wheat farming, very rural, very rural. We met in the county seat of Morrow, which has 280 people. We had 16 people there from Sherman County, which is pretty good penetration of the population. And planning it happened with an amazing friend now named Sandy McNabb, who's in his 60s and was the agricultural agent there for years and knew everybody and grew up in Sherman County. His family goes back to the 1890s.
Oh, wow.
Really cool. But he was awesome enough to actually connect with a couple gals from Seattle who had this crazy idea. And so we planned it with him. And as we planned that trip and the conversations that would help people try to find nuance and try to get curious with each other, I kept running into places where I was like, oh, I'm being super bipartisan. I'm being totally neutral. And Sandy would be like, well, then why are we talking about this over the next 4 years? What, you think Trump isn't going to get reelected? What's that about? Oh, shit. Right. Constantly learning from working with him. Anyway, that was a really amazing experience. Fast forward a little while, we're doing the Evergrey. I'm loving everything about it, but I'm kind of looking up at this larger problem going, the distrust is so toxic. It's so bad that, again, I don't know who I'm talking to anymore. I don't even know, like, so few people trust journalists now. And I don't see journalism working on that problem very effectively at all. You
guys are the enemy of the people, right?
Right. Well, half the country.
I think that's how it was stated.
Yeah. I mean, the recent Edelman poll, I don't have the number in front of me, but, like, it's just tanked.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't believe that so many journalists are just moving on with their day as if this isn't a big problem. And I'm convinced that part of the reason is because a lot of them have discounted a lot of people in this country. And that's not right. So I have a pretty sort of strong moral sense that that's not right, that we're not seeing people for who they are. We're seeing these caricatures, and we got to stop. Which, again, is not to say, like, the policy and political differences and what they mean to people matter. The fears and anxieties matter, right? But that doesn't mean we got to do this to each other. So I met John Wood, whom you've had on this show, and his very dear friend.
That's great.
I met him in the summer of 2019 at the Weave Summit in DC. I heard him talk about race in a way that I've never heard anyone talk about race. And I was like, who is this guy? Like, Braver Angels? What? What's Braver Angels? I was like, oh, Braver Angels is doing what I want to do. Cool. So the involvement sort of stepped up ever since.
Oh, that's really cool. And what do you do now with them specifically, or?
Yeah, so I'm their media advisor now, but things are in the works to up my involvement that I am extremely excited about.
Oh, very nice. That's very nice.
Yeah.
I had when you were talking, I was wondering, you were curious about the nuance of things, and I don't like what ifs, but
I like what ifs.
Do you? Well, sometimes they're okay, but
yeah,
do you think that would have been the case if your parents didn't vote for Trump? Like they just went for Hillary?
Yeah.
Do you think it would have been different?
I think it might have been. Yeah, I think it might have been. I think about this a lot. Like, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. Someone else actually involved with Braver Angels, and I had just learned that he's half white and half Indian. John Wood is half black and half white. I'm a Mexican immigrant with Trump supporting parents. I think I just have this hypothesis that a lot of folks who are pulled toward bridge building, it's because they cannot pick a side in their own identity. Some division within themselves will not resolve. And I think that is enormously interesting.
Yes.
And maybe powerful.
Yes.
And should be looked at. Yes. Right? Because I keep seeing this pattern.
Yes. Yes.
So it's really cool. It's the people who defy the stereotype, or who think one way but are supposed to think this other way. A good friend of mine in Seattle is Black, queer, and conservative. Like, she has gotten so much flack.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like,
I'm sure.
She's now become like a bit of a public figure, going on the radio and stuff because, oh my gosh, nobody can believe she exists.
Right.
And that's just, well, what's going on here, guys?
Right. Yeah.
So it's a sense of the truth is so not, you just can't sum it up in these ways that we've been doing. And we have to keep our eyes open to what the truth really is. And again, it's the people who cannot resolve the divides in their own selves who I think look around and see the toxicity of the divides that people are trying to resolve.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I had, so I've thought about that too. I've noticed the same or a similar kind of pattern, and that's an interesting kind of series of events or connection of things. And so, I mean, I said before, I'm half white, I'm half Latin, and when I hear people talk about heterodox ideas about race or ethnicity, like, it just makes sense for me because that's sort of kind of my existence, right? It's just like, I don't fit neatly in one bucket, not because of anything. It's just, it just is, right? That's the luck of the draw for me in this, on being on the planet. And I'm totally comfortable, and, I don't feel, when I was younger, I had a process of, not picking one, but this process of trying to say, like, what does it mean to be me, and what does it mean to be me, kind of individually, but also within my race and ethnicity. And there was a point where I just stopped trying to pick one or figure out more of one, or it's like, no, it's both, and that's not always going to be clear cut.
Yep.
So, as is true for many things, I had Thomas Chatterton Williams on this week, or released it this week.
Awesome.
And he's incredible. He's a great guy, and I've followed him for a while. I've read I've read his books, I've read his his pieces, and he's great. And he gets a lot of heat from different sorts of folks. But I asked him this question. I said, we're the half breeds, man, and right, and and we had a laugh about it, but. He said it way more eloquent than I could. And it's like, yes, that's exactly what it is. He would say, we can hear all these different ideas about racism or certain groups or certain races. He's like, but, how can I say all white people are racist or whatever when my mom, who's a white woman, loved me and cared for me and my family, or her side of the family, showed me genuine love and affection and care, and they're white. And the same for him, his other side, he's black and black father, and the same thing. So maybe this whole notion of these kind of large generalizations about whole racial groups or categories with their inherent or endogenous notions is maybe sort of weak. Not to say that there aren't groups that can be that way or subsets or whatever, but the same for me. I said, yeah, that's exactly how it was. My mother is white as well, and all of my mom's family, they're my family. I love them dearly, and they have always, they never treated me any differently. And the same on my dad's family and the Latin side. It's just, again, like I'm the family. Like, I could never see an entire group or race or ethnicity as, inherently racist or inherently this. Like, there are obviously individuals that are, and okay, but so that whole notion there. So I asked him. I said, so is that why we're seeing this a little bit more clear-eyed of sorts, Thomas? He goes, he's like, I think there's a perspective there that we obviously don't have that from other people. It's not better or worse. It's just a different perspective. And so then, right, you're able to see, oh, things are complicated. Oh, there's nuance here. Life's in the gray. Like, okay. Like, you start to see it differently. And then that kind of permeates outward for other ideas or other things that are so binary, seemingly, or things
exactly. And I should say, by the way, I was saying, before, that it's that the irresolvable differences people carry in their identities or whatnot. But in my case, it's got another layer that you hinted at just now, talking about your family, which is, it's not so much that I have Mexican immigrant parents who voted for Trump. It's that I love my Mexican immigrant parents who voted for Trump.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's the part. Yeah. That not only do I love them, I understand them. And if I were them, I would have voted for Trump too. That's the thing that really just goes, what, and that's the part that's so much harder to talk about. We like to intellectualize. Everything's about reason and whatnot, but it's not. It's about connection. And connection has a couple of facets to it that can't be boiled down to reason at all.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I again, I mean, I see presidential elections and campaigns and stuff. It's really, as I get older, I mean, they're absolutely very important. And we've have a long history of being, I am too, kind of from an outside perspective, really fascinated by presidential elections. And it's really fun to study and look at big national trends and stuff. But really that stuff is sort of symbolic, right? What really, and it's not that it's not important. It's very important. But a lot of that stuff on our day to day, whether it was H.W. Bush, Clinton, Jr., Obama, Trump or Biden, my day to day hasn't drastically changed. Now, I know that is not true for some people. There are some groups of folks that it really does. Of course, I hear that. But I think for a large number of people, it really isn't going to, right? And what does change is, well, are you going to your town halls to fix the crack in the sidewalk on the, bike path that you use? And how are we going to together collectively figure that out? How are we going to have, cool block parties or, whatever it is, right? How do we those are the things that are really important. And I always feel that if people are more focused on that, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be focused on state or national politics.
Oh yeah. Because it does matter. The culture, it comes back to that culture conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
You feel you belong someplace, right? And then the culture of that place makes a sharp left turn in a direction that makes you feel like you don't even belong. You're not here, you're not wanted. That's horrible. That's extraordinarily distancing and alienating.
It's all of those things, because there's a larger sense. It's really hard to kind of just kind of flesh out, because it's really complicated in some way. We all know what it is, but the phenomenology of it's hard, is because all of those things, there's an element of home, like what that means for home. And the home to me is always a kind of personal and or possessive kind of
Yes.
noun, if you will, where it's, we're putting ourselves into that definition, right? So much kind of what you were saying earlier about the people. So when you say, well, this is my home, there's a sense of, well, this is where I feel identity. This is where I feel safe. This is where I feel secure for me and my family. And any intrusion into that, or seemingly some intrusion, or anything different, is going to be a very, sometimes in some places, hostile attitude. But at the least, it's like, I equate it to, if someone just opened your front door and came into your house, you'd be like, whoa, what's going on?
Yeah.
Wait, I didn't invite you. Like, you didn't. I mean, what's going on? Like, and it might be like, well, I just want to spend some time with you. I want to hang out. Like, yeah. But wait. We got some idea roles here. So, and I think that the analogy doesn't completely go, but I think for cities or towns, and, sometimes, at a state or national level, we have certain ideas about placing our identity or finding our security. And we most certainly do have to always keep challenging ourselves and keep expanding our horizons. And we have to really, there's this push-pull kind of thing. But I think that's a very, that taps into our safety and security pieces of who we are. And so when people start messing with the idea of home, we don't really like that. And we get really, well, wait a minute. And so I think that, that's understandable. And I think we have to be, in some ways, respectful of that, but then also say, okay, well, it's okay. It's fine. How do we figure out how to do this? And, we do have kind of open arms for other folks that also want to make it their home. So
yeah. And that's really ultimately the hardest part is you have your own perspective and other people have very different perspectives. And it's extremely uncomfortable, to meet at the edges of those perspectives. And actually, I mean, there's a line that I was just in a meeting with my local Brave Angels Alliance, and somebody kind of floated the idea of like the courage to listen. Because every time you hear a perspective that is so different from your own that it can feel opposed, you're going to feel judged.
Yeah.
And you have to push through that feeling because the judgment is just something you interpret being. Right. It doesn't have to be there, and it often is not. But it's again, the feeling of home is like we feel more at home when everyone around us is just like us. Yeah. But that's not going to create a very, I don't know, name your adjective, right? Like on the spectrum from diverse and inclusive, but also wise, like pluralistic.
Well, wise, but I think
fun.
Right. Well, right. Fun. Yeah. Interesting, fun. Right. But I think it's also this idea that at various points, and there's different waves of it, people came and they said, hey, we're going to settle down in this town or this city and then build from it. And then little by little, other people would do that. And you start to grow it into something more. Like if you look at the history of big cities like Chicago or New York or Boston, like there's all of those elements of it. That doesn't mean it needs to be for every single small town, but I think having no, we've done this before, maybe it's been a while, but this is okay. Like, and I think, pushing past that, or being courageous to kind of listen and consider, I think is important.
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about, as much as you want, you mentioned it. Let's talk about your book that's coming out 2020.
2020.
When's the pre-order up?
2022.
Excuse me, 22. I'm going backwards.
We don't talk about 2020. We don't talk about it.
2022. Tell us when the pre-order links are up and I'll post it everywhere. But tell us what the book's about. And I'm sure I'm assuming, if I might be assuming wrong, some of the other concepts that you've been floating around on the interwebs about curiosity and undividing stuff. I'm assuming that's going to be in the book, maybe, sort of. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So maybe tell us why you have or are, writing the book and, what it's about, and kind of get into some of the main themes and concepts.
Yeah. So the polemic of the book, and this is only part 1 of 5, so it's not a book that's just all problems, right? But it begins with what I call SOS. It's the call for help. It's the way that we are toxically divided. And so there's 3 forces, sorting, othering, and siloing, the SOS. sorting is that tendency to be around folks who are like us, which is a perfectly normal community building, bonding tendency, but has its dark sides, right? When things go too far, which they do and they have,
Certainly.
because everything's reconciling into these two stacks and it's all of that. And so then once you're sorted, it becomes easier to other. And it turns out that dehumanizing, or, that sounds strong. I don't mean it to sound quite so strong, but even in small ways, thinking that some other group is less than your group is, again, an extremely normal part of human nature. When taken too far, can be extraordinarily toxic. And we've seen that in history. We see it today. And then finally, siloing. And siloing is about that. It's not even that much of a choice, unfortunately, because of technology and social media and the algorithms and platforms that really want our attention at any price. Siloing happens automatically. Siloing means that you're surrounded by the voices and stories made up by folks whom you already sort of approve or whose worldview you're in sync with, one way or another. So siloing is just like all of these things. If you leave yourself to kind of the factory settings, SOS, you're going to sort, you're going to other, and you're going to be siloed in these places. And the sum total of that is blindness. The sum total of that is you are not going to see the world around you.
I like that.
Your world is going to shrink. And in fact, that's what's happening to a lot of us, as smart as we think we are. We have to understand that without some proactive countermeasures, these patterns are not serving our ability to see the world around us clearly. So to the extent that you value that, right, you need to do something about it. So that's part one. And the rest of it goes through, the answer is curiosity, but I don't mean that in a, here's the cute things we learned in kindergarten. We learned to be curious. No, like curious is actually a serious thing. And it is the resistance. It's the real resistance to dare to be curious when, your side or your silos or what have you really would rather you stay predictable. We really would, for a bunch of reasons. And you're going to be more comfortable if you just stay predictable. But that's not powerful, and it's not wise, and it's not strong, and it's not true. I care deeply about truth. So I walk through how you can actually channel you can, by understanding some of the mechanisms of curiosity and interest, you can channel them. You actually can point them. A lot of people think about curiosity the way that some people think about love. It's like, it's either on or off. It happens or it doesn't, man. Like, I don't know. I can't control it. And that's not true. That's actually not true. So, there are ways that you can direct your brain to be more curious.
Yeah. So maybe flesh that out for us. How do you give us some of the backbone or the spine of how you understand curiosity? I think where have you said it elsewhere? It's like these 4 concepts within curiosity. Is this getting this right? Yeah.
Yep. The 4 steps are pretty key. One is, and this is social science around curiosity, and the brain kind of bear this out. So this comes from those ideas. But the first is to mind the gap. Curiosity only is turned on when there is a gap between what you know and what you want to know. That means you actually have to be aware that there is something you don't know that you want to know. So once your attention is away from that gap, you stop being curious. So hunger and thirst, you're going to be hungry until you eat. Doesn't matter what you do with your attention. Curiosity is driven by attention. So you can put your attention on the gap. That's something you can do in your brain. The next thing is to gather and collect knowledge. It turns out, and there's a fun little bell curve for this, if you know too little about something or too much, you're not going to be curious about it, right? Like if you're a seismic retrofit engineer and someone's asking you basic questions about, like, I don't know, upgrading their building from earthquakes or something, you're going to get kind of bored really quickly. But at the conference with other seismic retrofit engineers, you're going to have all kinds of questions about
have imposter syndrome.
Well, yeah, like who knows if you belong there or not, right? But yeah, so curiosity is also about, if you look around, even if in your life, everyone has like a group of people they can think of, like the most curious people in my life. And one of the things that they'll usually have in common is they know a little about a lot. And if you think of like yourself walking through a cocktail party, just listening to conversations and deciding where you want to step in, if you know a little bit about a lot, like here's a little conversation about like the opera, and here's a conversation about that movie that just came out, and here's something about math, like advanced math. If you just know a little bit and you can recognize some of the vocabulary of the things people are dropping in their conversations, you're going to be like, huh? Oh, I heard about that. yeah, I wondered blah, 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 right? So it's called the zone of proximal learning. When you don't know too little and you don't know too much, it's just right. So you can go in and ask questions and learn more. So it's this virtuous cycle that interrupts the vicious cycle of SOS. The blinding, narrowing cycle of SOS gets hacked when you learn more. And the more knowledge you have, the more gaps you can see. The more gaps you pay attention to, the more questions you'll ask, the more you learn, the more gaps you see, and it just keeps going. And then, so that's like the first level, right? That's tier A. And then tier B is kind of making sure that you are resilient in your pursuit of curiosity. And one of the things that will get you off that train real fast is if you just feel like it's too hard. It's too hard for me to learn what I need to learn to close this gap. Or it's too anxiety inducing. That one's a little trickier. But the too hard, at least, a lot of people get to a point where they feel confused. And so confusion, we don't often think about this, but confusion has this sort of negative connotation. You're overwhelmed. You're like overwhelmed by what you don't know. But if something is complicated, you could just roll up your sleeves and be challenged by what you don't know. That's just a simple reframing. And we do this in journalism a lot. You'll come up against some issue, homelessness in Seattle. Oh God, that's confusing. But actually it's just complicated. You can find ways to tackle it, right? So we all can do that. And that opens back up this idea that, look, just because it's difficult doesn't mean you have to walk away. And then the last thing is really the most important thing, is that you have to be able to reject the easy answers that your silos give you, that you hear all around you all the time. Those easy answers are just like bread and butter. They're everywhere. You'll see a meme, right? Every meme is a mic drop. Every meme is supposed to start and finish the conversation in one square. It's like, no, it doesn't. That's not true at all. So the way you do that is you have the radar to ask, what am I missing? And I do that all the time. I've made it such a habit where I'll read an article and I'll sense myself going, yeah. And then I'll go, wait, what am I missing? Well, they didn't talk to anybody with this perspective. Oh yeah, good point. And you know what? Like, actually, this perspective that I'm reading about is already so much what I think. Let's put a pin on that. And then suddenly everything is sort of open to question, which isn't to say that we should just not be certain about anything, but we should recognize that certainty is the arch villain of curiosity. If you think you know, you won't think to ask. So cut that out. Like, whenever you feel yourself getting to certainty, I think of it as closing doors. Right? Like you're walking through passageways in your mind, and every time you're certain about something, the door closes. Well, there's nothing more to see here. And the question, what am I missing, is the doorstop. It's like, put that in front. What am I missing? Even just leave the door open just to see. And as a journalist, I've learned that I can't be a good journalist unless I do that.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, so it'll make us wiser human beings if we can train our brains to put down some doorstops and think about these mechanics.
Yeah. No, that's great. I really like it. The one, I think it's on the first or second one where you're talking, it reminds me of there is in developmental psychology, it's Vygotsky. He has his zone of proximal development, right? So it's where you're trying to push, not actually, but challenge students where you want them to have a little bit more of what they don't know. So that way you're basically lifting the ceiling, right? So that way you're able to say like, oh, okay, if you're just here, you're not going to really grow. You'll just kind of tread water. You want whatever you're getting a little bit more difficult. And if it's too easy, you're definitely not going to grow. So he talked about zone of proximal development, and then also he had.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because if you look at a challenge and you're close to the summit of the mountain, right? I mean, so research has shown that you're curious about something, and if you feel you're really close to the answer, it's like being close to the summit of the mountain. You're tired, but you know you're almost there, and so it picks it up. Right. But if you realize that it's actually really far away, like your curiosity will dip.
Yeah, right, right.
So much how you think of it.
Right. So there's a zone of you don't want too far away, too hard, and you don't want it too easy, right? There is a kind of zone. What was the other thing he came with? It's scaffolding is the other thing, right? How much do you have, in his model, it's developmental. So how do teachers kind of provide a scaffolding? You could say this for clinicians, you could say this for just educators in general, of how they're not doing the work for you. They're not trying to close that gap for you, but they're the scaffolding. So you can do it, right? Because
Yes.
sometimes people need that. So
you don't check out.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds very similar to that. Yeah. And the last point that you were saying reminds me of is kind of epistemic humility, right? Which is, hey, look, there's stuff I don't know, right? I had on last week, well, I released it last week, Lee Jussum, who is, he's, in my view, right, he's really, really wonderful. But, he's been doing social psychology research on bias and stereotypes and a person perception for 35 years. Yeah, he's legendary in that way, in my view. And, we were talking about it. He was just like, as I get older, I have that thing where I just realized there's just like, I don't know so many things. And I feel the exact same way.
Yeah.
Right? I haven't been doing clinical practice for, 30 years. I haven't, but I've been doing it for over 15 now. And even though I have, the doctorate and all that stuff and all the, over the 10,000 hours and all that, I just feel more and more. It's like, I don't know that. Yeah. Nope, don't know it. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I don't know anything. No, I mean, and that's not like me trying to do like a, I'm just so humble. It really, I feel like, I know this and I've studied this, but there's like so many things I don't know about it. And I want to know, and I want to know that from conversation. I want to know that. That's why I read so much. And it isn't for a long time. I think when I was younger, it was like just pure information. Like, it's just like, I want to know all the things. And now I still want to do that. But now I push myself to say, now, how can I use this? And how can I give this to other people so they can use it? And then it's this kind of, it's almost like a tennis match, right? It's like I give the ball and then they give it back. And then, you build a rally of sorts.
Yeah, you can learn around it.
Yeah.
And I think that there's two kinds of I don't know. There's the I don't know that closes the door. It's the I give up.
Right.
And then there's the I don't know that leaves a question open that ought to be left open. I went as part of this fellowship I was in 2019. We took this trip to DC and had a lot of behind the scenes conversations with politicians, particularly like senators and representatives of the state of Washington, and a lot of really interesting people. But I was really keeping my ears open to, themes of polarization and division and dysfunction in government. And, the number of people who kind of would get to that thing where they, and one person I think just said it, it's like, you cannot say you don't know.
Yeah.
You can't say it.
Right.
Because you lose people's confidence, and that's all that matters.
You're a failure. You don't know something. No one trusts you, et cetera.
So that's the thing, is like, I don't know is seen as, oh, you're not. Why am I even talking to you? You're not the expert I thought you would be. And it's like, is anyone the expert we thought they would be? No. I think one of the problems with expertise is that people feel entitled to be certain about more than they ought to be. And then everyone
that definitely happens.
And like, you can't, and I love me some experts, like that's fine. But that's that humility. It's like, the I don't know shouldn't be an I give up. It should be an empowered I don't know. Like, just like you said, I don't know. What can we do? What can we learn about it? What can we do? Let's look at this. Let's look at that. Let's keep it open, build the scaffolding, right? Like, get a booster seat, whatever, just like reach that out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I'm a professor. So one of the things I love about teaching is, especially grad students, is, if they're engaged, they ask questions. And so, sometimes there'll be some students that'll be real tenuous. They're like, I don't want to ask, I should know that I'm dumb. And I'm like, listen, I had an old professor when I was an undergrad. He said, if you don't ask the question, you're not asking it for someone else. Meaning, you raising your hand and asking that question, there could be 10 other people that wanted to ask the same question.
Absolutely.
So he did this one thing one time where someone asked a question and they kind of like did this like half raise of their hand and then they put it down and he's like, no, go ahead. What is it? What do you want to say? And like, oh, I don't know. And they're like, okay. The person asked the question and he answered it. And then the professor says, how many other people were going to ask that question? Yeah, exactly. And like 10 hands shot up, right? Everyone was like, I was going to ask the question. That happens all the time, right? And so it's just like, so people, with students or even clients or other people that I talk to, they'll say, well, you're the expert in human behavior. I was like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, sure. I know some things I should. I mean, but that's fine. Like, you're not barred from asking about, severe mental illness or, clinical psych just because I had more training or more education. Like, I don't have your perspective. Your brain thinking about a question this way, I don't have that. And that can jog me to be like, oh man, I never thought of that. Wow. Like, I got to think about that. I don't know. And, so, I think, yes, I like the way of you saying like, I don't know in two different ways is right. And we need it in one way more than the other way. So,
yep.
Okay. So what else is in the book? So we've got the curiosity thing. What else is big in there? You got the 3, the SOS. What else you got in there?
Yeah. So the title of the book, I never thought of it that way. It's kind of more than just a title. It's the goal. Mm-hmm. So this happens to everybody, all languages, all cultures, where you're just minding your own business and you're having a conversation or you're reading an article that comes from another perspective. And then you'll think, sometimes even say out loud or make some physical gesture of, I never thought of it that way. Mm-hmm. And those moments, some people call them aha moments, but aha is more like, oh, I've arrived at something I've been wondering about. This is different. I never thought of it that way is literally like, oh, another perspective just became a bit coherent to me in a way I didn't expect. I've been surprised by meeting someone at the boundary of our perspectives. We've calibrated enough that theirs could just like hop over to mine for a second. And it's this, to me, it's a physical sensation. And I've talked to a bunch of people about this moment. I've had a bunch of folks just like track their week and document 3 I never thought of it that way moments that they've had. Mm-hmm. And we've learned amazing things together, mm-hmm. including I think everyone has a tell. Mm-hmm. For me, it's and other people's just like eyes wide or oh yeah, or whatever it is, or like a nod. Mm-hmm. So people know what that is, but the goal, I think that the way, again, to face that problem of our incredible shrinking worlds in these SOS, the sort of red alert ways, is can we have more I never thought of it that way moments? Mm-hmm. And we put ourselves into the context and then chase those different perspectives, chase the calibration it takes, right? Because you need that little bit of trust. Mm-hmm. Whether you're in a conversation that sort of happens automatically, people just go, hey, yeah, how's the weather? Oh, it's good, whatever. And you calibrate. Mm-hmm. And then you can have a conversation where you can learn from each other. Right. In a lot of social media platforms, like good luck, because people always act as if they're halfway through a conversation they're angry about. So good luck, getting to calibration with a lot of voices on the internet.
Right.
It can happen though. I mean, you and I are in some conversations that are pretty okay. Yeah. So it's not impossible. It's like our friend Angel says, I love this quote from him where he says, social media is the boss level of discourse. I love it. The problem is, of course, the boss level, to get to the boss level, you're supposed to beat all the little minions. Right. But for people to just go on Twitter and start spewing, they don't have to pass any tests of discursive competence at all.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So that's where we are. Yeah. But the I never thought of it that way moments, once you start noticing them, mm-hmm. it's really cool because you'll start to understand what it takes to unlock more for you. And it's different for every person.
No, that's great. No, yeah. I mean, I probably have one of those almost every conversation with someone on the podcast.
Good.
Almost every single one. I mean,
yeah. Can you think of what's one that's there for you?
I'm trying to think of some of the recent ones. Well, I mean, I mentioned Thomas earlier, and he had said something about the example I gave earlier, which was, I can't think about white people as inherently racist or whatever because my own mother's white and she loved me. I was like, I never making it personal. And because again, that's sort of my story. My mom's also white. My dad, I was like, oh, I was thinking about this very cerebrally, analytical. And then I was just like, no, making it the personal thing. And I was just like, yeah, no, that totally resonates with me. I never thought of it that way. Yes, absolutely. That makes sense to me. And so sometimes that will happen where it's just it opens up something I had already thought or believed, but sometimes it will do it where it will it will open my eyes to a perspective I never had, or it will correct or change a belief I had.
Yes.
So it will work in different ways.
Yep. I think of those as there's sort of two. There's the Intuit moment. I call it Intuit, just drop the W, Intuit. Intuit moments that that strengthen your beliefs, right? They give you, like, in a sense, sort of more concrete reason, like a really good reason. You're like, oh yeah, oh my God, yeah.
Right.
And then there's the challenging Intuit moments. And those are usually accompanied by a little jolt of anxiety. Like, oh shit. Oh shit. I never thought of it that way.
Right.
Like,
Right.
oh, no.
Right.
And those are better, but a lot harder.
Oh yeah.
You know, they're harder.
Because then, yeah, you have to let go of something you felt or believed. So I have been putting off, maybe unconsciously for various reasons, but mostly I think it's just because I've talked about it so many times before, but I've thought about doing a solo podcast where I just kind of give my experience and my journey from, theist to atheist, but I just got to sit down and do it one afternoon or something. But, or find the right interlocutor of someone that can, that we'll see. But yeah, there was a series of those moments where it was like, I never saw it that way. I never thought of it that way. Like, whoa, like, and just totally made my world go upside down. But there's another one where, again, lots of props to Angel in this episode because he's awesome. But he said something in our conversation a long time ago where he was like, yeah, I don't like the hot take. I just, put that in the freezer and let it sit for 2 days and then think about it and see if you still have the same strong feelings. And I was like, yeah, I never thought that's such a good way of saying it. Yes, we don't all need that,
Yes.
So it's, sometimes it's visual imagery. Sometimes it's personal stories. Sometimes it is on just cold, hard logic where it's just like, damn, like, man, I got to just sit with that. That's way better than how I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is emotive. So I think there's like maybe different ways or mediums in which people can kind of.
There's a bunch. Yeah. There was one moment I had semi-recently. I was reading an article, just a news article. And I think that my brain, I know this about myself now, my brain is sort of always scanning the world for things that make different people more understandable to me. And so I do that a lot when I look at articles. So the quotes or moment, they're almost always quotes. Those sort of looks into other people's lives where I understand their perspective in a way I just never expected really stand out to me. So I've learned that about myself tracking these Intuit moments. But there was one where it was about Latinos and their politics, which of course is a big issue after 2020. And this reporter had talked to a man somewhere who talked about how he was eligible to vote. And so he's going into some place where he needs to get registered with one or another party. And so he goes up to the Democrat table. There's a Democrat table and a Republican table. And he goes like, what are these two parties? And the woman goes, well, the Democrat party's for the poor and the Republican party's for the rich. And so he walks right over to the Republican table. He was poor, but he goes to the Republican table. And that I was like, yeah, that really does it. Like that helps me understand, but I want to like save that moment to try to help other people understand some of that like, well, you might be poor. Do you want to be poor?
Right. Maybe I totally get that logic. In that moment, that logic makes so much sense.
Right? I thought that was such a great Intuit moment.
Absolutely.
For me, but like, it depends who you are, right? For other people, it's like, yeah, no, duh, of course. Like my dad would read that and go, really, Monica? Like, obviously. I'm like, no, but I think differently about these things.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where it's, you'll see those things and it's like, wow, like sometimes you'll be like, how did I miss that? How did I just,
it's all the pieces there, just arranged a little differently. And then you don't forget those. Some of them you really hang on to for a long time.
So I guess the last thing I'll say about the book is, so with 2022 is a long time away. I mean, sort of.
I know.
Maybe you can do it the old school ways where they used to like in every newspaper, they print a chapter every week or every month or something. Gosh. And then you totally come out or something like they used to do. That'd
that. Be cool. I do have a newsletter. It's irregular, but it will become more regular soon.
Oh, nice. Okay. I'll post all that in the links.
Yeah.
What do you hope, unless there's anything else big things you want to talk about in the book, but what do you hope people get out of it or take away from the book?
I'm going to tell a little short story, and it's going to answer your question.
Okay.
Have you ever seen the movie Midnight in Paris?
Yeah, it's a Woody Allen movie, right? With
Woody Allen movie. I know he's an issue right now, but yeah. But
listen,
the Midnight.
I know he's an issue, but listen, Annie Hall is a great film. He's a great director. His personal choices in his life are
not been
very
great,
suspect, but as a director, he's fantastic.
Yeah, I will say truthfully that, for a while, a lot of his movies have really touched me, and they've been great. So Midnight in Paris is one of my all-time favorite movies. And the movie, I remember, I told you I saw a lot of movies as a kid, all the time. And my first job for almost 4 years, I worked at a movie theater. God, so cool. Fun. Movies are everything to me.
Yeah.
Went to see Midnight in Paris. And Midnight in Paris, the premise is that this guy sort of feels kind of disconnected and detached from the present day. Like he just, there's this nostalgia for the past. Mm-hmm. And so he's able to, in fact, was it a woman or a man? Oh my God. But he's able to travel to the past.
Owen Wilson.
Yeah, it was Owen Wilson, right? Was it Owen Wilson and the girl? No, it was just Owen Wilson. He's able to travel to the past. Mm-hmm. And he meets someone in the past who is very detached from her time. Mm-hmm. It was the 20s. Mm-hmm. And wishes that it was before times, the Gilded Age or whatever. And anyway, the way that movie conveyed the lesson of there is so much magic around you right now. Mm-hmm. That your life is full of possibility right here. Mm-hmm. And I walked out of the theater and the whole world was different. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Mm-hmm. Wait, I didn't know that I could enjoy this and that this is kind of awesome. And looking at everything in a completely new way. That's what I hope, not maybe to that level, because that's ambitious. But I want, no, I'm serious. I want my book to make people look around at their daily lives and recognize that there's a lot more they can do than they thought to surprise themselves. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's great. No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you want impact, but not impact necessarily for yourself to, sell 2 million copies or whatever necessarily, but that you want impact for each person that reads it for their own personal lives.
Totally. And I've realized actually that was also one of the key reasons I became a journalist too, is I don't know how to explain this very well. I've always found sort of more pleasure in seeing things I thought I knew in a new way than in seeing new things. Mm-hmm. Because again, you become more intimate with the layered reality of existence. Right. To be very philosophical about it. Mm-hmm. There is no one thing about one thing. There's many things about every one thing, especially if people are involved. So when you get to see new things, the same thing in a new way, it just adds a level, it adds richness. Yeah. And it's awesome. So again, it's not about, I'm not trying to reach intellectuals, right? I'm not trying, it'd be great, but it doesn't need to be all people who are I'm here to, grow in my knowledge and lord it over people. No, that's not the point. Yeah. The point is to wherever you are, surprise yourself.
Yeah. I kind of take that, with arts, right? It's I can go to the same museum over and over and see the same paintings. I'm going to get something different out of it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it blows my mind every time. I read Crime and Punishment every year since 20 years ago.
No way.
Yeah, it's my favorite book. It's a thing. I read it every year. It's things like music, right? I have albums that are I listen to all new stuff all the time, but there's 10 albums I probably listen to once a week, where it's just yep, I'm listening to that every week. I agree. I think there's this, revisiting something, there's no bottom to it.
There's no bottom. Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to perspectives, it's there's a different perspective for every human being on the planet.
Right. Well, even for different people, but then also from within yourself, me listening to this album when I was 19, well, it's going to look so much different now in my, mid 30s. Right. I'm going to hear it differently, maybe nostalgia, but then just oh, I never caught that. And this feels different now, maybe in a better or good way. But so,
yep.
I definitely think it's helpful.
I'll never forget. I became a mom 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. And before I became a mom, Seattle was a city of bars and restaurants. Yeah. And after I became a mom, Seattle was a city of parks and strollers that I had never seen before in my entire life.
Right.
They were always there. Seattle has like 450 parks.
Wow.
Alien beings could have come down from outer space and plopped those parks down, you know, when I was ready to leave the house with the baby. And I wouldn't have known, like, wouldn't have noticed.
Right.
Because parks were not part of my life. So yeah, it was like stages of life. You keep changing your whole biography. Everything you see is adds to the lens of everything you will see in the future.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So yeah, you're right. It's not just that there's 6, billion different perspectives. There's also like that times every moment of their lives and when you have to catch them.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
that's infinity right there. Like
yeah.
A lot of richness.
All right. Last topic here. I'm only talking about this because you've talked about it publicly. I don't usually like doing the whole tropes of sorts. But it's important, and you've already mentioned it anyways. So as listeners will hear, we're both Latin. You more than me.
More or less Latin. We could talk a long time about
that. So that means that we both like tortillas and beans and rice and
spicy food.
And spicy food. And what else? We both speak Spanish and like salsa, merengue. You must like mariachis, right?
Mariachis.
All the stereotypes. We obviously vote Democrat all the time because
all the time.
That's how it works. So, yeah, 16 was a watershed moment for many things, but I think 2020 was surprising for some people. I don't think it was surprising for you, maybe. It definitely wasn't surprising for me. How the hell could Latinos vote for Trump or a Republican? Like, what the fuck is that about? Right? I mean, Democrats are the party for the poor, right? They're the ones that are for helping you out. And, how is it fathomable that, Latinos would vote for somebody, that doesn't care about folks like that. And also, what is the Latino vote? What the fuck is the Latino vote? Tell us, Monica. Explain me, okay?
I'm the expert.
Yeah,
I'm not going to say I don't know. I'm going to come in guns blazing.
You're going to come hot.
All my points.
I'll be right there with you.
So much confidence. So get ready, take these.
Okay. Tell us, what are your thoughts?
No. I mean, I this is one of those where it's like, I don't know, but that's not the I give up. I don't know. It's I have a very limited perspective on this. I don't know, but I certainly have been asked my opinion many times. So I can speak. I can speak from the perspective of someone who has experience with this bucking of stereotypes and has spoken about it and defended the truth of it many a time and is always happy to defend the truth of people against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Right.
Yeah. What is the Latino vote, right? I mean, first of all, there's so many levels, right? We can talk about, you said Latin. I say Latino. Some people say Latinx.
Well, there's that whole, what does Angel say? Empirical, what does he call it? Empirical, grammatical empiricism or something like that. There's a phrase he uses for it. It's hilarious.
There's the right name to use and you're using the wrong one.
Right.
That's a problem, right?
Right.
So there's that level. And then there's, like we talked about, everything's a construct except people, if you go right down to the very base of things. And it's Latino is a name for a group that, someone decided should be grouped from the perspective of the United States. And I'm not convinced it's a very useful group. It's useful sometimes because there's certainly a lot of things that bind that group together, like language, culture to an extent, right? But there's a lot of countries. There's a lot of cultures.
Well, that's the thing about it, right? What do we mean when we say Latinos? So, we can use some interchangeable terms, right? I mean, there are distinctions. I'm not going to repeat myself. Some people use Hispanic, some people use Spanish, Latin, or Latino. the trendy one with the young kids is Latinx or Latinx. They're all talking about, or they're all trying to get at the same concept. They're trying to get, or there's, this group of people that has some things that unite them.
Yeah.
So what would we say? So for example, right? Like, you're from Mexico, from North America. My dad is from El Salvador, from Central America.
Yep.
My wife is from South America. So, I have friends from the Caribbean. What makes us all in the same bucket, right? We're on different continents. We have different countries, but there are things that unite us to fit under, when we check that box under ethnicity, right? There's the Latino. So how do you understand just kind of what that is in your opinion?
Yeah. I mean, and the evidence that it is real is the fact that every time that I hear somebody go, I'm from name a Latin American country, I get excited. So clearly there is something intuitive in me that believes that is a beautiful kind of grouping, at least for belonging to it. Okay.
But what excites you though? In that way, when you hear that? So when I tell you that half of my peoples are from Central America, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. You know what it is? It's the same kind of excitement that people, let's say you're an avid, I don't know, rock climber. When somebody goes, oh yeah, I went rock climbing this weekend. Oh my God. It's really that at its essence. It's, just realized that I can untie this ribbon and unpack this bundle of things that we can talk about and connect over.
So what would be the thing? Right. I agree with you. So what would be the things?
I would explore common language.
Right. So Spanish.
I would explore common culture. Maybe you grew up religious like I did. Sounds like you did.
I did.
Not
Catholic.
Then I would explore like the same thing when we talked about like in Michigan, you drive a Chevy and a Ford, and in Maryland, you eat crabs. Like, what's that? Like if you're from El Salvador, I've been to El Salvador. Cool.
Oh, yeah? Oh, cool.
Yeah. I was in San Salvador on a U.S. Embassy, U.S. State Department trip to talk to journalists and all at the major newspapers. It was really cool.
Very cool.
That was like 10 years ago. Anyway, so it's like, okay, let's talk about that. But it's the language and it's the culture.
Yeah.
I think most of all. And then you would explore the shared pieces. If you were from Mexico, even better, more potential shared things in common. If you were from Monterrey, even better. Like, wow, do you know this part of town or that part of town?
Right.
So it's just that little bundle of.
Yeah, there's a connective tissue that's there, right? Which is, I think, language. Beautiful. I think it's definitely food of sorts generally. I joke that everyone likes beans and rice. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people maybe don't. I've never met those strange Latin people.
Neither have I. Those are hard to dislike.
Right. But like, for example, like, in South America, they don't have tortillas. They don't. Right? No.
I didn't know that.
They have rice. Cool. Like rice separate. Like they just, or they have like potatoes.
Oh my God, like these are the perfect food.
If you go to the Andes, they have like different elements. They eat a lot of pork and they eat a lot of different elements of like dishes that have potato in it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, very different.
But it's very different, right? If you go to the Caribbean, right? Yep. It's different. Do they have tortillas there? Maybe they do.
Well, there's the perception and then there's the reality, right? And the reality is always more nuanced than the perception. That's just a rule of life. And then it all depends on who's doing the perceiving. I'll tell you, so when I was like 6 or 7, moved to New Hampshire, only Hispanic, Latino, whatever, girl in my Catholic school. And Jessica Walker must have been like 2nd grade. I'm talking about something about Mexico, Monterrey, something. And she interrupts me and she goes, there's paved roads in Mexico? And I'll never forget this. We were very little. And, now with the lens of today, I've asked myself a question that I never asked before, which is like, was I offended? I hadn't asked myself that question really when I was little. I didn't think to ask that.
Right.
I was not offended.
No.
I was amused.
Right. It's my response is also I'm amused, but that just shows like there's a kind of innocent ignorance, if you will, but like they just really don't know. Like
They really
they're
don't know.
asking.
And I told you that story about I was carrying the thread back of how I became a journalist to like, second grade or whatever, sitting and taking a test and finishing it before or whatever. I actually got a nickname, Speedy Gonzalez.
Oh my goodness.
And my nickname was Speedy Gonzalez because I would finish tests first. Was I offended? No. I was flattered. So
Speedy Gonzalez is pretty fucking awesome.
Well, but here's the connection. My friend had like what she knew of Mexico was Speedy Gonzalez.
Right.
That cartoon had mice with sombreros over their heads leaning up against buildings and kicking up dust clouds on dirt roads. So the lesson I learned very early, because I really did learn it back then, was that people can only know what they're exposed to.
Right.
And there's something very weird about expecting them to know more.
Well, that's the whole thing about it, right? Like, so again, the things that the connective tissue, language, maybe some food. I'd probably say music, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Everyone's done salsa, right? All Latin people know how to dance salsa. I would think.
Oh.
I would think. I don't know.
You can't. Don't show yourself.
Right. But we have an idea if we've been to, an aunt's party or we've been to, grandma's house or something, and someone's putting the music on and everyone knows, Elvis Crespo and, you know, all these like hits. It's kind of like people know Frank Sinatra and Elvis here in the United States. Like there's Spanish people have that too. Like, and it doesn't matter which of the countries you come from, right? Now, each country might have their person, right? Puerto Ricans have a bunch of folks that come from Puerto Rico, and Celia Cruz is from Cuba, and whatever, on and on. But
I'm all about Juanes and Shakira.
I mean, yeah, Colombians got their flag.
Natalia Lafourcade. I don't know if you know.
There you go.
Anyway, continue.
No, that's right. But there's some kind of music crossover. You guys get Maná, one of the best Spanish rock bands ever, right? But so okay. So all these things translate, right? So like, I'm not Mexican, but I know these people from, Colombia or Mexico or whatever. There are obviously specific distinctions, but okay. So there's some uniformity, right? So there's a really powerful moment in the movie Coco. I don't know if you've seen the movie Coco.
God, fantastic. Cry every time.
Yeah, I know. Fantastic film. And I don't say that because I'm Latin, right? It's a really good story. However, and I did, it was a really cool thing on Disney Plus when they released it. I watched it in Spanish, which was even better. It was so much better. It was awesome. But the interesting thing about that is, like, again, my wife's from South America. My dad's from Central America, and that's half of my family. Like, I knew, and when I talked to other my family members and other people I know that are Spanish, everybody cried at the moment with their grandma. Like everyone knows what that's about. Now, again, there's, I think, plenty of cultures and plenty of races and groups have an affinity with, I know the Black community, grandma's a big deal, and with white folks, it's big. Like it's not a specific Latin thing, but the way, the nuance of what it looks like and how the movie showed it was like, I know exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Right. I know exactly what that is. And that was how it was with my grandma. Like I know exactly what that was. There's a connecting thing there. Okay, fine. Outside of that, I said this in the other podcast with Angel, which was, you have 22 or 23 countries that are Latin, at least, or Spanish rather. And when folks come here to the United States and they immigrate here, you're importing all those differences, right? So Mexicans in the aggregate are pretty different, aside from those general things we just described, than people from Central America and people from South America. Like someone from Chile and someone from Mexico might as well be in different different cultures. There's things that connect them in some ways, but it is different. So then when people talk about the Latino vote or Latinos as a group or, the ethnicity, right? Okay, fine. But what is that?
Yeah.
Like, how do you talk to people with so then one of the things becomes, okay, so then you would talk to folks that are Latin in this country, they've immigrated here, or even if they're second or third generation, maybe based on their local regional affiliation.
Mhm.
So if you fast forward to the 2020 election, why did Cubans or some, or not just Cubans, but some Spanish folks vote for Trump in Florida, but the ones in Arizona and Nevada voted for Biden, right?
Yeah.
Because, okay, you can look at the individual differences, right? Okay, fine. But just see, when you're looking at group stuff, there's different challenges and there's different ways of which you're instantiated within a community or within a group, regardless of your ethnicity.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's kind of funny because I mentioned that this company that we published the Evergrey with was based in Miami.
Yeah.
And I think folks in Miami just laugh at this, because Miami's a city that knows that like Latino doesn't mean anything in Miami. Like there are so many different kinds of folks who come from places that speak Spanish, and Cuba is like, Cubans are so not democratic in Miami. You know what I mean? Like, no. So to them, it's just no mystery at all. The expectation that everyone behave uniformly is more, it's just it shows the gap in knowledge that hasn't been filled. It's like,
yeah, absolutely. And my understanding with Cuba is, well, are you like the first wave from like 59 that immigrated? And then what about the one in the 80s? And what about the other in the early 2000s? Like there's waves of immigration from Cuba that also have difference. And then not just the difference waves of immigration, but also, well, then where's the second and third generation from all those as well?
You know, one thing that this has just occurred to me, but one thing that I think a lot of Americans, and I say that in like I don't know, whatever, like, I'm not even gonna try to define it, but a lot of Americans who are not Latino, maybe don't have a lot of experience with, is something I'm just gonna call political trauma.
Okay.
Like Cuba went through political trauma.
Sure.
You know, the kind of political stuff that happens in a country that makes people leave by the bajillions and make their affiliations and fight within families and that kind of thing. Like you could argue we're having political trauma now. Sure. Yes. But the kind that makes people leave, you know, we've talked about it, but not. So there's countries that have that in their recent past. In college, I studied in Spain, in Madrid.
So you know about Franco.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It wasn't until I got there. The first thing I noticed was that people in Madrid were so leaned in to politics, like, my God. And I mean like Madrid politics and country politics, but local as well. I could not believe how engaged everyone was. And it didn't make that much sense to me until I understood. It's in there. You know, I stayed with a host family. My host mother, I'm 5'2". She was like here on me. That generation of Spaniards was malnourished. They are shorter than their children, all of them. This is legit. It's an extremely recent political trauma. Yeah. And so it's so not about like this or that policy or like I like this candidate or that candidate. It's like, no, dude, your family went through some shit.
Oh yeah.
Over what they experienced in Cuba with socialism, communism, and all they need to hear is that Biden might be a socialist, and they're running the hell the other way.
Oh yeah, they're going. Yeah,
but you're not going to find that in Mexicans,
right?
We don't have that kind of trauma. It's like what we have in Mexico is mad corruption, mad corruption. I mean, that's everywhere, right? Like who knows? But anyway,
but it's distinct in Mexico and what it looks like, and
yeah.
AMLO, right? Is that the acronym for the president, right?
That's the acronym.
He's not going to fix it all. He's trying.
Yeah, well, it depends. Yeah, I mean, there's still
depends on who you ask, but
there's a lot of turmoil there too, just right now. Like people in my family, most of my family's there, and they're like, rah!
Yeah.
All up. Oh, it's
So how do we, I think you're right. Is how do folks? This is where it becomes really difficult, right? Is how do you kind of expose people to nuance and differences within a big group like Latinos, where, I mean, that's hard to do. Some of it you have to like, okay, there's the kind of almost humorous now, stereotypes of, Speedy Gonzalez or whatever. Like, okay, that's somewhat humorous. I mean, I'm sure some people have been offended if they've been, criticized like that or compared to that. But when you're talking about now, right, in this diverse country we have and all these things, like how do we educate people or talk to people, not you or me specifically, but how do we have conversations or connection points where it's like, well, wait a minute,
Yeah.
maybe that's not what this is. We have to rethink how we understand that. And I'll just stay with Latinos. I mean, you could probably do that with other groups of folks as well. But how do you think we do that, or have those conversations?
Well, having been in media, I can be an idealist and I can be a pragmatist. I'm going to choose to be a pragmatist. When you want to, and I cringe at the word educate, but when you want people to learn more about something that matters, and you want to do it on a massive scale, you can't control it. What I think you ultimately do is you wait until you're on stage. And what I mean by that is there's like different sort of current events that just get so big that they really are on stage. And what I've learned over my years in the media is there's only so much room for so many issues on that stage. After the shootings in Atlanta, anti-Asian animosity was on stage.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so what do you do if you're Asian and you want people to spend a little more time thinking about the nuances behind your cultural group? You take that mic. You say as much as you can while you can.
Right.
So that to me is the pragmatic sort of like, you can't control it, but you take the mic when you get it.
I swear I'm not doing this just to make you happy.
Okay.
But I never thought of it that way.
Hooray!
Right? I promise.
Here's your moment from this podcast.
I told you.
There it is.
I told you it was going to come up. Usually every podcast. Yay! I never saw it in framing that, because I usually get a little cynical, a little annoyed when it's like no one gave two fucks about this issue until right now.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that always makes me feel, it's like, well, this is disingenuous. Like everyone wants to be an activist about we're just jumping from issue to issue when it's hot for 15 minutes. And that's my cynical view sometimes. But I think the way you're framing it, I mean, I'm sure that happens, but I think the way you're framing it is, it's not a perspective I considered before. And I think there's a lot of validity there, because it's like, no. You're on stage now. Like this is your bit in the play, and you come on and maybe you have a whole monologue, or maybe you just have a small bit, but there you go. And so you want to take, you kind of want to capture that moment, and you want to say, okay, how can I use this as best I can?
Yep.
So I never thought of it that way.
So the fact that the question after the 2020 election was like, what the hell happened to the Latino vote? What the hell? It went in the wrong direction, says the Democratic Party. Right. That's putting it on stage for at least the folks who follow politics, which is a pretty, loud assortment of folks who are going to pay attention and then like scream even louder. So that was an on-stage moment. I think, to your point about that cynical sort of, like, why won't anyone, like, I get that. That gets frustrating, but it goes back to culture where we kind of started, is like, nobody controls culture. I don't care how much money you have.
Absolutely.
I don't care how powerful you think you are.
I agree with
you. It is the most beautifully unpredictable mess, right?
Yes.
So what you do is you get ready. But I say all of that also being fairly cynical myself of the activist mindset. Like I don't mean everyone become an activist, just like wait for your chance and then slogan everything you can, paper Facebooks with protests and rallies. No, like not necessarily. It's more about just, if it's at the water cooler, right? Like talk about it.
Right.
Like be grateful that you're being asked. Right. Which goes back to that Speedy Gonzalez moment. Like the best thing about the fact that my friend in second grade asked me or said, there are no paved roads. Like there are paved roads in Mexico. The best thing is that she told someone who knew something more, what her assumption was,
right? Who
could then say, yeah, no, it's totally paved roads in Mexico. In fact, Monterrey looks a lot like Boston. It's actually really similar, yo.
Right.
But I'm not surprised that you don't know that, because when the hell are you going to watch Mexico on television? Like it's not going to happen. So I think it's an opportunistic, right? And it's just being real about human nature. Because you also I cannot believe how much we expect each other to care about everything at the same time.
Right. That's the other thing. Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's just a bandwidth issue.
Totally.
I mean, it's not about like, I don't care about this or this or this. It's just like, again, you don't need a hot take on everything, and I don't have time for everything. Exactly.
What you do with that expectation is you make people pretend to care, which is much worse. You know what? I don't want people to pretend to care. Like,
Right.
I want to work
Genuineness.
with I want to work with genuine interest, right?
Mhm.
I want to try to like spark that interest, sure, but don't pretend. You're just gonna check out and resent me.
Yeah.
I don't know. So like, and I know that one of the main critiques of all of that is patience. Like, who has the patience, right? Especially when it comes to real, like, and I'll say these words where, it can trigger sort of like, wait, maybe it's not that bad, or maybe it's political, but like, if it's a community that's been facing a lot of harm, a lot of oppression, a lot of whatever, so we don't have the time, people don't have the time to sit around and wait to be on stage.
Right.
We're going to get there, right? And that's where activism is really useful. Like, sometimes it's just like, look, this tipped the bucket. We are fucking going.
Yeah.
Like, join us on the streets, for any old issue. It's like, if it, like, I always think of my kids, it's like, I think I'm a good mom and whatever, but sometimes they need to yell at me to get me to finally listen to them. Right. And that's just human nature again, too. It's just like, we're not all going to be saints and angels out there. Like, we can't just be expected to know what we have not been exposed to and haven't been made to understand. And we can't listen to everything all at the same time.
Yeah. And I think sometimes some pushback I hear from that is, well, it's not my job to be a spokesperson for my race. And it's not my job to educate you. Maybe you need to get out there and, read some or look at some things. And I can hear some of that. And look, people can do what they want to do individually. I'm not going to tell people what to do necessarily, but I do think it's like, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. It's like, well, I see that as an opportunity for me. Now, some people, granted, maybe some people, they get tired of like the whole thing. Like, I got to explain to you about like general things about my race or correct when this, like, I could see that being annoying. And I definitely could see that being annoying in certain contexts for sure.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is some element of opportunity. And I think also to going back to one of your earlier points is, we have to make it okay for people to, fumble it a little bit, make some small inadvertent mistakes. But if people have good questions, it's like, well, I'd rather get the question than someone just not ask and assume. That's worse in my opinion. But again, that's me. I'm not going to say everyone doesn't think that way, and that's fine. But I would say I would much rather, and I think that that's also true of, like, for example, so I'll take a minority group out of the picture. I think we should do the same thing for Midwestern whites. We can't have just assumptions about them. Yeah. Right. Like there's maybe some things are generally true, right? They, don't all Midwesterners love a good, what's it called? The casserole. There it is. I was trying to think of it. Right. Maybe not. Yeah. Maybe not. I don't know. But I'm not going to assume. I think you should always come with a spirit of, curiosity, asking good questions, and being very inquisitive. That those for any group or for any individual person. And so I think that is true for our discussion about Latinos. But I think the problem becomes where now if to ask a question is racist or sexist or, all those things, or, and then, so now you're shutting down people's ability to try and get information because it's like, oh, you didn't know that? Well, the fact that you didn't know that means you have some implicit, unconscious racism. It's like, whoa, like, hey, look, maybe they do, but at least they're fucking asking. Yeah. Right. What else would they do?
I don't like being firm on anything. I'm pretty firm on this. Is you can't have a world where you can't ask genuine questions. It's not good for anybody. To me, when somebody asks a question that ends up confessing to the presence of a racial stereotype, what they are doing is illuminating that racial stereotype has a presence in the world, right? Yeah. I think that's different than saying that it comes from an evil place in their heart where they are making it worse. Right. But that's me, right? Everyone's going to have their own perspective on this. Sure. I get it. Sure. But I believe after 16 years being a journalist, man, if you can't ask questions, right, and if you can't, not only that, if you can't ask questions of people, we're in real trouble. I mean, what I was saying about how it's all people, right? If the only way you can learn and ask questions is from dead texts, things, You can ask things. You can ask things that don't feel and don't engage and are not there with you. That's who you can ask. I get where that comes from. I completely understand the distrust that comes from and the pain. There's a lot of pain.
Yeah.
But I don't think pain excuses everything.
Sure.
And I know that maybe that sounds harsh. I just think we're in real trouble if that's where we are. And this is something I'm feeling like nervous having just said, because the implications, right? But I just feel that's a strong conviction. I'm willing to be talked out of it, but that's where I am right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think I'll put my slightly for a minute, a clinical hat on is like, yes, you don't want to, the point you have to, people have different pains and sufferings, which is, it's hard and it's each individual way for each person. And there needs to be a space for that. Right.
Absolutely.
But, in therapy, and I think just in general, the goal is never to just, how can you boost that up and then stay in pain and suffering? The point is, how do I come out of it? How do I get better? How do I, and everything's a process, right? Everything's, you don't want to skip steps, right? So sometimes you have to do hard work in that, and that's important. And I just think in society it's true as well. It's like, okay, like we need to have ability to say, there's people that have a lot of pain and suffering in various ways. There's a lot of social ills.
Yep.
Okay. That's important. We need to give that time. We need to give that its space. And then we also need to say, how do we rehabilitate? How do we come out of that? How do we grow from that? How do we become healthier individuals and healthier people for ourselves and for others? And I don't know if you can do that if one just stays in the pain.
Absolutely. And I'll add this. We were talking about that natural tension between individual expression and community group norms, right? It's a beautiful tension. It's got to check itself. So I'll tell you, a few months ago, after everything that happened over the summer with the protests about race and racism, racial justice. So here in Seattle, there's a friend of mine who's white and was talking to me about some themes around this that were very, very much about her life and her dreams. And she's really kind of struggling with something. And we had a great conversation. And then she went and talked with, she told me this later, she went and talked with another mutual friend of ours who is white. And when that friend learned that this friend had talked to me, a person of color, about race, that friend told her, never talk to Monica again about this. Come to me. Don't talk to her. What are you doing? Don't do that. She's a person of color. Like, And so this came to me, and it took me, like, my friend was telling me this, right? That, hey, I talked with so-and-so and she told me not to talk to you about this. And I was like, the fuck? Like, really?
Yeah.
Hang on, right? Like these sort of group directives, like, again, comes from a good place.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely, right? Like, but
it's a script. It's a type of script, right?
It is. And the thing is, like, I think what hurt me was the idea that this group directive would be more illuminating to my friend than our 12 years of friendship. She knows I love to talk about this shit. I want to talk about everything. Don't listen. No, you're going to trust all that over, like, what you know about me? Yeah. Like, hang on. Right. So it's also like, can we give each other the freedom to interpret some of these suggestions the way we will? And so that was a really, I'm still working through all of that, but clearly you can tell, like, I had an emotional reaction to that.
Of course, because there's a personal relationship there. It's not like it's some random coworker or an acquaintance. Like, if it's a 12-year personal relationship, that would, what up? That element would almost be more offensive than the other fact of it.
Right. So, and it just made me go, how many of my white friends have taken this directive to not talk to me about things that I find really interesting, or to hide what they really feel about really fraught, interesting issues because I'm Latino. What?
Yeah.
Anyway,
And I
so
think
everyone's going to have their own, and some people are super happy, right? Some people are like, yes, good. I don't want anyone to talk to me about that. Cool.
right.
But like, let's not assume.
Right. Yeah. And again, the most charitable reading of that stuff is I hear it and I know it comes from a good place. And I know it's not trying to be punitive or condescending or othering. I know it's not, but I think sometimes it's like, okay, you can have those ideas or you can believe those kind of group directives, but I do think you have to say like, look, leave that window open of, well, maybe this person just doesn't abide by that one. Maybe I need to do that with other people.
Let me go check. Let me not be afraid of my friend.
Right. Right.
Like, let's not get that. Let's not go that far.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And and I think that's the whole point, right? That's the whole point of what you're doing. And I think that's the whole point of a lot of the ideas that you're putting out there is how do we have more curiosity? How do we have more ways of connecting with people in really important ways? And I think if we have my idea is that if we have more people in society that aren't ignorant about some of the challenges in culture, but spend more time in creation and spend more time in how to foster that and how do we build relationships, you kind of sorts rise above the noise and say, yeah, I hear that. And there is a lot of like really negative things. And there's a lot of value and importance to talking about that, but I'm also going to spend time in how to do something and how to create and how to be productive, one conversation, one relationship at a time and build from there. Yeah. I think if you foster and develop that in a society and a community, that will give people more of like, okay, well, now I have an alternative. It's not just like, like really cynical all day. It's like, yeah, that's cool. But there's also this other group of folks or these other things that are happening where they're like trying to be productive and they're trying to create something. And I think more spotlighting on that stuff also needs its time on the stage too.
Yeah, exactly. That's well put.
Well, I'll say this, Monica, you are an absolute delight to talk to. I could talk to you for many more hours. Really, sincerely, I mean that. I was so happy that we could talk. Tell listeners where to find you online and find your work and your newsletter and all that stuff. Where are the appropriate places to find you?
Yep. So I'm on Twitter occasionally, actually growing more and more there because it's fun, at Moni Guzman, MONIGUZMAN. And then if you want to check out my newsletter and get on that list, that's at bit.ly/reclaim curiosity.
Nice. Okay. And I'll put all of those links in the notes. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and really, really good conversation. I enjoyed every second of it.
Oh yeah, this was lovely. This made my Friday.
I'm glad it did. All right. I will see you soon, hopefully.
Okay. See you around.
All right. See you.